Hello, Star Watchers.
Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello.
I come to you today because I have booked some time off from work for my birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear white privileged cisgendered man. Happy birthday to you.
So I've got an hour or two to kill in which to make a video. One video that I've wanted to make for probably a couple of years now is one talking about biographies, and I have a whole stack of about 20-25 biographies, and I keep putting the video off because I was like, talking about so many books in one video will be an absolute ball ache to edit and film, and I thought, hang on a minute.
Get it together. Nobody's lasting anymore.
We don't have to do that. I can break it up into little segments, which will mean I can make more videos. So I'm going to start this video talking about a few biographies, maybe 3 or 4, and then I'll probably mention a couple of other ones that I have yet to read. And then I can continue on doing a little series talking about biographies, depending on, I don't know, whether people find it interesting or not. To start with, I have my beautiful latte that I made.
Beautiful.
So I'm going to eat the foam off it, which is my favourite thing to do. And then I'm going to mix all that deliciousness up. And now we can begin. The first book I wanted to talk about is actually 2 books. One was this huge 800 page biography of Madonna that came out, 2023 it came out. This is one I also mentioned before on my channel, another biography of Madonna. I'm going to mention this one too because I think it's good to compare the different biographies to see how she's depicted in them. Let's get on with this one. I saw Madonna back in 2020 for her Madame X tour. My mum took me to see her in London at the Palladium Stadium, and that was actually a really interesting show. It's quite a small venue for somebody like Madonna to perform in, and you're all stacked on top of each other, and the seat in front of you, you could get little opera glasses, so I could put the glasses on and I could proper zoom in on Madonna and see what she looked like and keep up with the show. So that was good. And this biography ends just after that, when Madonna announced that she was going to do a celebration tour. I didn't get to go to that, even though I would have really liked that. But I did get a Lush bomber jacket from her website for that tour. So I'm glad I have the merch from that. But this biography chronicles her life from when her parents got together, basically, to a couple of years ago. And I did really love reading this biography. I think it's great to settle in for 800 pages for somebody who's had such a long-standing career like Madonna has. I really liked how it was focused on the role music has played in her life. Like, it's talking about the music that was out around the time she was born, and especially the musical cultures around where she was raised in Detroit, Michigan. So that I kind of hadn't expected to read about for some reason. But this biography, I feel like it's kind of divided into 2 halves, and the first half is up until, I would say, up until when she marries Guy Ritchie. I think before then, it feels like a standard biography. It's very career focused with Madonna, but you did get glimpses into her personal life. And I think after she gets with Guy Ritchie, it becomes very hazy around then. I think that's because she was having more children around that point. So I feel like the biographer wanted to give her more privacy to do with that. And I feel like maybe in her personal life, she was less revealing at that point, because that was that weird stage when she moved to England and she lived in that big English manor house and she was putting on an English accent and people were like, who do you think you are? Maybe it was around that time that she started putting more walls up, it seems. But up until that point, I was totally loving this biography. Even the parts when she was in school and she had that gay dance teacher who really helped her develop into the person she would become. That was where she seemed to discover the art of dance. And when he seemed really encouraging to her, and he told her she had a nice singing voice, and he even told her that she looked... What did he say to her? He said something one day that she looked like her face looked very like statuesque. She could have been a statue of the Madonna in a church. He said something like that one day. So I really liked getting some of the tea on when she was at school. And even when she was at the University of Michigan studying dance... Because I feel like you don't hear that much about her time as a student. I mean, she did drop out of the uni. Even her experiences at college were interesting to read. Did they say that they would sleep in the dance hall or something like that? And there were some references to other people who were in her classes, who I'm guessing Mary Gabriel, the biographer, spoke to. And then it gets into like the classic Madonna story of when she moves to New York. This did have some interesting tidbits about before she properly signed her record deal, and she took part in this sort of, I don't know what you call it, artist development program where they flew her out to France for what seemed like a couple of months. And it was very hazy in the description of what happened at this artist development camp. From what Madonna says, it seems like she was just, you know, hanging around in the back while people made songs. But I think it was probably a bit more intense than that. I think they probably schooled her a bit on how to market herself. I think there was a bit more going on there than what it made out in this book. Mm-hmm. After that, it also gets into how she got her record deal, because apparently it was a gay music executive who was sort of smaller on the pipeline from like the bigger execs, and he was in hospital for some reason, and Madonna cornered him while he was in his hospital bed, and he promised her a record deal then. It seemed like he was really moved that she would come to his hospital bed while he was ailing, but also that she kind of cornered him too and forced him to offer her a deal. And it was really interesting to hear this little band she was in before she was signed as a solo artist. She was in this little band in New York, and she started out as the drummer, and then she was seeing the guitarist, and then made her way to the front of the band as the singer. And was there some other guitarist that she got kicked out or something? Because they were then feuding within the band because they were sleeping with each other, which they'd all agreed that they wouldn't do. So Madonna basically finessed her way to the front. Even the biographer was taken aback that she would use these people like that. And then it got into the story of her first manager and how they would hire, I don't know what you call them, the fake fans. Like they hired fake fans to come to her first gig at this bar in New York. And there were all these fake fans saying they loved her when they didn't know her. And then was this around the time that Madonna then cornered that executive in the hospital bed and got a proper record deal, and then left this manager in the dirt? And this manager was paying for a whole apartment for Madonna. She was paying for her to have facials and, you know, everything she needed. And then the manager basically just got sucked dry and then discarded like an old chocolate wrapper. And Madonna moved on to the next best thing. But it was interesting because it seemed like Mary Gabriel interviewed this manager, and the manager was just towed up after that, and she gave up the music business. And then she ended up working in a care home for like 4 years because she was like, I cannot handle being used like that. And then 6 months later, she was hearing Holiday on the radio.
A mess.
So yeah, reading about that time in her life was probably my favourite part of the biography. It was saying that around this time she had like 8 different boyfriends, and she was spinning all these plates, seeing one of them one day, one of them the next, while none of them knew about each other. And that was fascinating. And I was like, you go, Madonna. You suck all these men dry and leave them in the dust behind you.
Let's go! Confront the problem! Fight! Win!
And she was also dating really cool artists, which is kind of strange. I don't think a pop star would really do that nowadays, but back in the day, in the 80s, there was this major art scene in New York, and I really don't know how she wiggled her way in, but she just seems to have these social graces where she can wiggle her way into these communities and become the star of them.
A sassy, swanky, fun-loving it girl. Somebody who's ahead of her time.
Like Andy Warhol at this time in the 80s loved her. So yeah, I think that was really cool. And something that in this biography, I feel like it didn't go into that much. But it really did go into that, so I love that. And you can really see the influence of art on her life, and especially in her 90s music videos, where you could see the influence of loads of like surrealist art and things. And even now, I think with a lot of the things that she's done to herself to look like something, I think that is very influenced by the musings of women in art and photography specifically. I think she's really into photography, and she's like modelled the way that she looks now on what she thinks looks good and dynamic for pictures. So that was really interesting. I love the details of when it really gets into her career and her career's taken off, and Like a Prayer is, you know, the song of the decade for the 80s. And it's describing some of the things in the music videos that you don't see on camera. Like how when they were filming that music video, they were going to have this sequence of her falling through the sky. And they filmed that with her jumping from like a 40-meter diving board into a pool. And they filmed her doing it. And while she was falling, she was just flailing. Oh, I'm going to die. And they were like, this is so bad. We're not going to use this footage.
It's an absolute mess.
And then even when she was dancing, you know, where she's dancing and the burning crosses are behind her and she's, you know, the white saviour of the 80s. And while she was dancing, she allegedly stubbed her toe on a nail or something and her toe was bleeding, but she never missed a beat. You know, I love those little details. So yeah, it was really good. And then fast forwarding, as it gets into her marriage to Guy Ritchie, it becomes a bit more shaded and you know less about her personal life, and that's probably because, you know, she is a mother and she wanted to protect the children from scrutiny like that. So I understood that, but to read a biography, you know, it is less interesting, less captivating, because all you then hear about is her projects that she's working on. You just hear about the music, the movies, you hear more about that. And then like these big changes in her personal life just seem to come from nowhere. Like her marriage to Guy Ritchie, it doesn't really go into the details about why that went wrong. I mean, clearly she's a workaholic, but it doesn't go into the deep tea of what went wrong. And even before that, even her marriage to Sean Penn, in this biography, it does go into some details. But I feel like since this biography was published in, I don't know, when was it? Early 2010s. Since then, Madonna and Sean Penn have worked out an agreement about how they're going to talk about each other. So then in this biography, Mary Gabriel doesn't mention really much at all about why their marriage dissolved. Like there's references to, you know, that it became toxic and things like that. But there weren't any real dirty details, even though newspapers at the time all around the world were publishing the details, what was alleged to have gone on. And even this biography references those things. So I was like, Mary, come on, get it together. You could have given me something.
That was her all is not good enough.
Sometimes you need a little more than that.
You know, there's a way of talking about those things that's still respectful. One thing I thought was particularly good about the biography was it was really good at describing trends in music and trends in the film world and how those have worked in Madonna's favour and against her at the same time. Like when she was filming, was it Bodies of Evidence? This biography talks about how the men on set were just vile to her, and in the movie, does she get beat up in it or something? And apparently when they were filming it, the men like really wanted to beat her up because this was on the back of her, you know, erotica era when everybody seemed to hate her after that. And I mean, for the biography, I could see that it was really leaning heavy into this narrative that everybody hated her. It's hard to know how much of that is true. And it was saying that around this time in the 90s, women were depicted this way in movies, like Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. You know, she's a strong-minded woman, so they kill her in the bath. The character's deranged in that movie. But it was good at highlighting these trends, so I appreciated that. What else? It was quite clear that Mary had done a lot of research for this biography. Like, this biography doesn't even have a bibliography at the back of it because there were so many notes to it that it would have been another 200 pages of references. So I did appreciate that research. But to me, the research was also quite uneven. And I think that's because when I looked through the bibliography, I could see that Madonna was referenced as having given interviews. So I think that Madonna probably gave approval for the book. Clearly she would have done, because legally they would have had to go through that route anyway. But I think that Mary definitely kept stuff out or was afraid to do research into certain areas to keep Madonna on board. So I did clock that. But I mean, there was still a good amount of research. So if you're a Madonna fan, of course you would love this biography. But if you're just a standard person that has ever seen Madonna, you would be left with questions. This biography makes no reference at all to any surgery she's done. I don't know if in a biography you can speculate about such things, because I know in America they have the HIPAA Act that protects against medical details being released about people. So, you know, I thought I understood why that wasn't referenced at all, but come on, Mary, you can give us a hint. At this point in 2005, Madonna was recovering for a few months. You could just say that. You don't have to say what she was recovering from, but you could say something like that.
And that's something you need to work on, honey.
But really, I wanted more of that. I wanted to know timelines of recovery, surgeons' names, specific types of facelifts and things. I wanted the tea on that, and I didn't get that here. At one point, the most it referenced was her hands and how people have commented on what her hands look like. So, yeah, that did disappoint me. I liked that it was respectful, at least. It wasn't exactly going after Madonna, so I did appreciate that, but at the same time, I'm not an idiot.
No one wants anything sugar-coated, they want reality.
I'm just stating the facts.
And what was interesting reading this, after reading this one, is seeing how the biographers feel so differently about her music. Like in this one, Tara Borelli clearly loves her earlier music up until about probably Confessions on a Dance Floor, which is such a great album. But Mary, she clearly loves her music all throughout, so I did like that as well. Even if I thought Mary at times was really giving Madonna flowers where she didn't really deserve flowers. Clearly she loves her albums and goes into so much about the producers and the music videos and the tours, so I love that information. But also, instead of giving me personal details about what was going on in, you know, the Sticky and Sweet tour, it was all about how the tour really went. When, if I wanted to, I could just look up the details of that myself. So sometimes, especially later on in the biography, it wasn't giving me details that I couldn't find out myself. Whereas as a biographer, I feel like you should be researching the details that people can't find easily. But, you know, whatever. Going back to the music, personally, I love Rebel Heart. That's one of my later Madonna albums that I love. And I also really love Hard Candy. I feel like Hard Candy gets overlooked a lot when I don't think people realise that that was actually quite a big comeback album as well. At least in the UK it was, because I remember 4 Minutes being a massive hit. And I was, 12, 13? And I remember loving that song, even though I didn't really know who Madonna was. So I feel like Hard Candy got a bad rap. And even in this biography, she was kind of hating on Hard Candy because she was saying that, well, Madonna didn't produce the album. That was all left to Pharrell Williams and Timbaland. And I was like, yeah, but she clearly wouldn't have done the songs if she didn't like them, Mary.
This, I know. This, we all know.
And secondly, it's such a good album. There are songs that she does now that even sound like that album. Like that popular song she did with The Weeknd. That sounded like it could have been off Hard Candy. So, no, Mary, you're wrong about that. Hard Candy is a hardcore Madonna album, despite what you think. And I think Mary was wrong about that. I think that she did not give Hard Candy the grace that it deserves.
I can believe what you feel. I can believe that. But do you really know? Do you really know?
No, you know.
Thank you.
Moving on after that to MDNA, Mary adores that album and was saying that it was just so amazing and it had so many bangers. And no, it didn't, Mary. It had Girl Gone Wild, which is a fun song. I do love that song. And it had that really beautiful song Masterpiece, which is in the credits of that WE movie she made about Wallace Simpson. But for the most part, that album, I think, apart from those songs and the tour, is, I think, her worst album. Have you heard that birthday song on that album? That is one of the worst songs I've ever heard. That song sounds like it was written by a 6-year-old forced to write that song for their homework. I think it's called B-Day, but if you've not heard that B-Day song, listen to that and then you tell me if you agree with Mary that it's one of the best albums ever. It's not, Mary, you're wrong about that. Is that enough about this biography? It was interesting to compare these biographies and how it compares different moments in her life. Like, this biography opens with her when she's in talks to film Evita, and that is made out like it's Madonna at her height. And that's the element of Madonna that it wants to focus on her as a Hollywood icon, that kind of thing. And this biography, this one wanted to focus on her more as, I don't know, like the pop queen of social justice. But yeah, you would read this biography and you would just think, oh, Madonna is such a wonderful person. She's so lovely and she's so thoughtful and conscientious and she's such a hard worker. And I do think that she is those things. But then there are blips in this book where things crop up and you think, why on earth would Madonna ever do this? It's inexplicable that she would tweet something offensive like this, or that she would make this decision to market herself this way. Whereas in this biography, she does seem more cutthroat. So at times I felt like I could see the faults in this book about how I don't think it really got the full sides of her character. When was it? Around that MDNA time of her album, her brother Christopher came out with a memoir about her and his life with her. And in this biography, it's not really referenced that much and it's seen as, a gross betrayal of trust. But then it does also talk about how when she first moved to New York and she was dancing and things, she would bring Christopher in to be a dancer in the background with her too, and how he would help direct her music videos and things like that. But really, it just seems baffling when you read this, that her brother would turn against her and be so mean and write about her that much. All it says is Guy Ritchie was the reason for that, because he didn't get on with Christopher that well. But I think in real life, there were a lot more tensions in their relationship throughout. So I feel like the biography could have been a bit more in-depth about her character and the different sides of her character. Maybe in the future there will be another bigger biography that really goes into the deep tea on Madonna and what she can be like, and more personal elements of her life that she doesn't want people to know about at this time. So yeah, I did enjoy this, but even though it's 800 pages, I could have happily read 1,600 pages of proper deep tea going in to Madonna. If you're a fan of Madonna, would recommend this. If you're not, I would still recommend it, but with a caveat that you should probably only read it if you're interested in reading about Madonna's career. So yeah. And next I will move on to a biography I was actually inspired to read by that Madonna biography, which is The Surreal Life of Leonora Carrington. And this was because in her 90s music videos, there are videos that reference Leonora Carrington's art, or they're inspired by that kind of surrealist movement. So I was like, well, who is Leonora Carrington? And then when I looked up her art, I realised that I was actually somewhat familiar with her artwork because I'd seen The Giantess and I'd seen some of her other paintings in art books before when I was growing up. And I wanted to know more about her, so then I picked this book up. And this one is actually written by, I think it's her cousin, or it's like her long-lost cousin. So that was a really interesting element, actually. And the book starts with the biographer / cousin contacting Leonora. And at this time in her life, Leonora Carrington was elderly and she was reclusive and she didn't do many interviews and she didn't give her contact information out to many public sort of people. So for her cousin to get an in with her was a big deal. And apparently Leonora Carrington was really lovely to her as well. Look at this picture of Leonora Carrington. Isn't she just a really beautiful older lady? I think she's so stunning. Also, actually flipping back, in the Madonna biography, it also referenced some of the artwork that Madonna owns. So I wouldn't be surprised if Madonna actually owned some Leonora Carrington paintings. And I just think her art collection must be to die for. But anyway, moving on to Leonora Carrington. I really was not prepared for so much tea on somebody's life. I think they need to make a movie of Leonora Carrington's life or a TV series or something because she was such a fascinating figure. She really is the British Frida Kahlo. And I think she should be as big as Frida Kahlo. Her background is just fascinating as an artist because she comes from an upper class English background and she comes from an era, when is it, like the 1920s maybe? When people were very genteel and it's very almost late Victorian really. And it was from an age when aristocratic ladies, once they came of age, would go down to Buckingham Palace or somewhere like that and they would make their debut into upper class society. And so that was really interesting to hear about because I think it wasn't too long after that they ended up scrapping the debuts. I don't know why they stopped scrapping it. I guess because it was just so old-fashioned and sexist, I guess. And it was really interesting how art and writing became something that was encouraged only as something a lady could say she's accomplished in. It was that sort of thing. Very Pride and Prejudice. And from what I recall, it wasn't too long after her debut that she then ran off with Max Ernst, who was like 30 years older than her, and then she ran away to France. Then Max Ernst was also married, so she ran away with him. Then she was living in France with him, and then he introduced her to the art world. And just capturing her all of a sudden being at the heart of the Surrealist movement was totally mind-blowing. It was detailing how she was writing short stories and really developing her craft as an artist. I love reading that stuff. And then it gets to a point that reads like a movie. She's in this rural house in France, and then World War II's broken out. France has surrendered to the Nazis because Max Ernst is Jewish. He is imprisoned, and then while he was in prison, she was basically abandoned in this house because she didn't really have an income. She was in France, which is isolated from Britain at that time because of World War II. And then it described how she sold the house basically without his permission. And then there were these priceless artworks that she took most of them, but then apparently she left loads of them there. And she bundled them into this car and then she drove to Spain, I think. And then when she was in Spain, she was like, what the hell do I do now? And she became really ill. And then her upper class family back in England, even though they were really kind of shocked and appalled that she ran off with some much older artist and gave up all of her privileges, essentially, to become some struggling artist, they then tried to basically kidnap her. So they sent her nanny that she grew up with, and then the nanny coerced her into an asylum. And then when she was in the asylum, I think they performed electroshock treatment and everything on her. It was horrendous to read that stuff. And then while she was in this mental asylum, she knew that her only way of getting out of the asylum with her nanny was that they were going to traffic her back to the UK, essentially, and she didn't want to return to her family. I think they were letting her go on, like, day visits into town and things at that point in the asylum. So then she befriended this man and latched onto him. He was planning on leaving to go to... where was it? I can't remember now. Is it Trieste? Somewhere like that. Somewhere where a lot of Jewish people and a lot of artists and, communist people who've been kicked out of their countries, a lot of them were fleeing to, I think it was Trieste, I can't remember. But she eloped with him and then married him so that when they, were boarding ships and things, they could say, I'm married, I'm not a threat, I'm not an alien. But then that marriage went sour once they got to wherever they were going to. And then down the pipeline, Leonora ends up in Mexico. And then did she marry again? I can't quite recall. And that's also where her art picked up again. And Frida Kahlo met her and even liked her. That was lovely to read. And then, is that when she also wrote The Hearing Trumpet? And I think she had children then as well. After that, she ends up in New York. and she was living on like $1 a day. And it was just fascinating to read the trajectory of her life because she's been a successful artist. She's been up there with the best of them in terms of society, the art world, and now she's living like penniless in New York City. And it's just amazing reading what somebody can go through and give up and sacrifice to be an artist. It was so moving to read about, and I think that she's terribly overlooked. And the biographer talked about this too. I think it's because she wouldn't give many interviews. Surrealist art is so abstract. I think she found it difficult to give an interview without trying to give away the meanings of the paintings. And I think because she was an expat from Britain, I felt like Britain kind of ignores her. But I wonder if in places like Mexico and in America, if she is bigger there. It kind of seems like it might be that way. But I think that Leonora Carrington is an absolute star.
Absolutely magnificent start to finish.
Bitch, you killed this one.
So yeah, I would highly recommend this one. And I really love that it was written by her cousin. I feel like it comes from a really tender place. And there are lots of details in this. I think because Leonora Carrington, I can't quite remember if she wrote journals, but she definitely kept some sort of writing life going that catalogued a lot of her experiences. And I do have The Hearing Trumpet to read. And I've heard Britta Bowler talk about that from her channel. So I am excited to read The Hearing Trumpet at some point. But yeah, definitely read this.
I'm telling you right now, it's good.
And I don't think you even need to know that much about her art or her writing to enjoy this book. And then the last biography that I'm really going to talk about is Capote by Gerald Clarke. Now, I didn't really know too much about Truman Capote going into this. I had always been interested in him because I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird when I was about 18, 19, and being blown away and hearing that the character, I can't remember his name now, but there's that little boy character that hangs around the narrator of To Kill a Mockingbird, and he has a weird relationship with his family, so he will stay with them from time to time. Then when I heard that that character was based on Truman Capote, I was like, well, how amazing that in this small town in Alabama, these two huge literary figures would end up meeting and knowing each other as children. So I became intrigued with Truman Capote after that. And then I watched the movie that they made this book into with Philip Seymour Hoffman playing Truman Capote, and also he fucking nailed that role, and Sandra Bullock playing Harper Lee. But the movie kind of focused on that In Cold Blood era. This biography doesn't just focus on that, it focuses on the scope of his life. But I did love this biography. It really did what a good biography should do, which is where it really captures the sensibility of the writer or the figure. And it adapts to their humour, their interests, and their background. And this biography really did that, because even though Truman Capote had quite a traumatic childhood, he did come from a background of some privilege, like they were middle class, and this was in the south of America, so they had a black housekeeper, cook / nanny, and it was interesting seeing that dynamic, because he seemed to really adore that woman that cared for him, because his relationship with his parents were really estranged. Well, it wasn't his dad, it was more his stepfather as well, I think. His relationship with his mother was definitely very fraught. And it was interesting how the biography talked about how he didn't really write about mothers in his books too much, and how he was very protective of her in that way. But essentially, after reading this, even though he's such a hilarious person and so witty and clever, it was so sad, just because I don't think anybody who writes anything wants to end up like Truman Capote did with Answered Prayers. And I haven't read Answered Prayers, but it's so sad thinking that the last, 15 years of his life, he spent thinking about this book, Answered Prayers, and this novel that he hoped would be his re-entry into, literary stardom, never came to be because he couldn't focus on it, and he struggled with drug addiction towards the later stages of his life, and yeah, it was very sad.
And sometimes this all gets too much. It's just all too much, it's too overwhelming.
No writer wants to end up like that, but I think you can also say that he did have a lot of literary success, like his short story collections, even some of his journalism, and his novels, Other Voices, Other Rooms, Breakfast at Tiffany's. He had really great success in his life. So his life isn't really a tragedy, but there was so much sadness in his life. But there's also a lot that is comical, so I appreciated that. What I particularly loved about this biography was that it really captured 1950s New York so beautifully. When you think of the New York from the bell jar, you think, oh, it's so glitzy and glamorous and such a big facade. But in this biography, it really goes into how much New York at that time didn't have like the massive skyscrapers that it had afterwards. It did have some of the biggest buildings in the world, but it was all very of a particular style. There was lots of faux palaces and fake Georgian buildings that are not real stone like they are in the UK. They're like, I don't know what you call them. Stucco, is that the word? And you get a sense of how much Truman Capote loved New York at that time, and especially earlier on in his career, he was writing like poems about New York and how much he loved it and how he saw himself as the jewel along the Hudson and things like that. So I really loved that because I hadn't really read about New York City in that fashion before. And it was interesting seeing how his career started out, because he didn't go to university to study writing or anything. He somehow finessed his way into being like a copy boy for the New Yorker. And I mean, like, how many people can say that they managed to do that? Granted, it was the 50s and he was like a white, somewhat middle-class person. So I guess he fits the bill in that sense. But nowadays you would never be able to do that unless you were, I don't know, the editor's nephew or something. And it talks about how he managed to do that and how then he started out writing short stories and how he was in many ways like a terrible copy boy for the New Yorker. He basically managed to fit in there because he befriended like this one woman who worked there who everybody hated, but he took a liking to her and she took a liking to him. Yeah, that was cute. And I loved hearing about him writing at Yaddo and how he then got into a relationship with this guy who was a professor at Smith College, and how he saw that as his university degree, being in a relationship with that professor, like a literature professor. He said that he learnt so much from him that that was his degree. And then the amount of melodrama in this book.
Are you ready? Come closer, because you're going to gag.
His relationship with this professor, he ends up rooting through the professor's diaries and being like, you're cheating on me, it's over. And it's all very over the top. And very much the kind of tea I want to read in a biography.
So as long as you're going to do it, you do it.
Even later on, his relationships were so melodramatic and hilarious. I mean, they're kind of sad in some ways because he was in this really long-term relationship with this writer, and that is referenced in the movie Capote as well. But this relationship seems more like the sort of cliche gay long-term relationship where they have a very passionate romance to start with and then it cools and then they open the relationship up. It seemed very much like that. And he would just think that he could just seduce these straight men then later on in his life, because he is like a sort of a famous writer and he's rich. So he will seduce, I don't know, seduce these men, is that the right word? Or are they kind of seducing him? And Truman will be friends with, you know, these upper society people in New York, and he's friends with Ronald Reagan and Guggenheim wives.
Glamour and sophistication.
And then he's boasting to his swans about how he's dating this straight married man who's an event salesman. And these women are like, that's pathetic, Truman.
It's never too late for you to get yourself together.
Why don't we stop all the drama, stop all the fighting, let's go get you better.
You can do so much better than this man. But Truman is so proud of himself because he seemed to see it as, look who I could get. I can turn straight men. So that was hilarious to read. And then clearly because these men are at best bisexual, they're still interested in dating women. So then on the sly, they'll be dating women. And then Truman will just blow.
You're an arsehole. You're fucked. I've had it.
And he'll be committing felonies, pouring sugar in their gas tank of their car and hiring like goons to beat them up, and it's hilarious. So would highly recommend this book. Full of good tea.
Take a look and gag, and then we'll talk.
Full of the highs and lows of a writing life, and lots of interesting stuff about his childhood and his friendship with Harper Lee, and very interesting stuff. That's going to be it for the biographies that I've read that I'm going to talk about. And just to end the video, I will talk about some biographies that I want to read. So I got this one, I think, for Christmas last year. This is Fiona Sampson's In Search of Mary Shelley, the girl who wrote Frankenstein. This looks like it would be a great read. And a lot of what I've heard about Frankenstein is clearly she was part of the Romantic movement, and she was with Shelley, going around the Alps, being inspired. I'm also interested in hearing about how she grew up as, you know, Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, and how she managed writing something like that at such a young age, and what her relationship with Percy was like. So excited for this. And then another book was one that I think I also got last Christmas that I've still not read, which is this generously sized biography of Oscar Wilde called Simply Oscar, A Life by Matthew Sturgis. I'm hoping this is going to be sort of like the Truman Capote biography, where it's going to be full of really good tea, and it's going to take them seriously as an artist as well. Very excited for this. Let me know if you've read any of these books or what you've been reading lately.
Well, that's about it, really. So, nice to speak with you. Ta-ta.
I now have to go because I've got lots of things to do today. My next video is probably going to be talking about some Muriel Spark books, because I'm thinking of reading through all of her catalogue, her oeuvre, as some would say. I'm probably going to talk about some of her earlier books in that one. So, yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye.
One way or another, I'ma love you. Sliding undercover. They don't wanna see it happen, but we say fuck it. They don't wanna see it happen, but we say fuck it. One way or another, I'ma love you. Sliding undercover. They don't wanna see it happen, but we say fuck it. They don't wanna see it